to the Legendarium podcast. Today is another Author Shelf episode. The Author Shelf, as you recall, is where we bring on one of your favorite authors and have a discussion with them in a little bit different way. This is not your typical interview. Instead, we ask them to pull a book from their shelves, something that is that has had an impact on them in some way. Maybe it inspired their own writing. Maybe it was just formative in their young reading lives, whatever the case may be. So that's what we're doing today. I'm your host, Craig Hanks. With me today is Ryan once again. Hello, Ryan.
Hey there.
And our guest today, Seanan McGuire. Seanan,
hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And the book that you've selected is The Last Unicorn. And boy, are we going to get there. It's a heck of a book. It's a heck of a story. A venerable fairy tale by this point, I think it's fair to say. But before we talk about that, I do want to remind people to go to thelegendarium.com. If you enjoy this episode, you want to hear others, you can find our back catalog organized by topic, by author there. You can also find links to Discord to join in the conversation, Patreon if you really enjoy what you hear and you want to support what we do at the Legendarium. We appreciate that as well. But I also want to tell people that, Seanan, you have something coming up. It's Into the Windwracked Wilds, coming up on October 25th. But this is not by Seanan McGuire.
No.
So this is one of your, what we call it, an open pseudonym, right? Deborah Baker. Yeah.
Yep, that is book 3 in Deborah Baker's Up and Under series, which is a series of middle grade fantasies written by a woman who doesn't exist. And writing them has been fascinating because it's not... I have another pseudonym. I'm also Mira Grant. And Mira Grant writes biomedical, science fiction, political thrillers. And then Deborah Baker just writes straight up middle grade. But Deborah Baker lived and died in the early 1900s. So I have to try and write these books in a very archaic style without using language that was common at the time that you find scattered across The Wizard of Oz and other books that were released in those days, that is not going to fly well with modern audiences and that I am personally not comfortable spending a lot of time dwelling on.
That's quite a tightrope.
It is. It's super fun.
We're gonna, it sounds like a writing exercise or something that could be a lot of fun. And we'll talk more about Into the Windwracked Wilds and the entire trilogy, I suppose, when we get to the end of this episode. But for now, let's talk about The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. Okay, now this book, what did it come out in 1970? Gosh, I want to say 73.
1968.
68. Oh my gosh. So it is venerable at this point, even more venerable than
really
myself. And it's the story. I'll just give everybody a quick recap. If you're worried about spoiling this 50-year-old book, 55-year-old book, well, go read it, I guess. But the story is, it's essentially a fairy tale about, the last unicorn. She lives in the woods alone. And discovers that she may in fact be the last unicorn. She didn't care before, but now that she knows, she wants to find out, are there others? Am I really the last one? She goes on a quest to find others like her. And in so doing, she picks up some companions along the way, a hapless wizard, or what do you call himself? Not a wizard, but a sorcerer or
He's
magician.
A sorcerer.
And
he's less hapless than he is sort of someone trying to water daisies with a fire hose.
There you go. And a woman who is, shall we say, somewhat intimidating sometimes. She's a delightful character. So the unicorn picks up these companions, goes about the quest, trying to find the Mad King and the Red Bull who hold the answers to all of her questions. In the meantime, she's turned human and must, find a way to live with that and potentially get changed back to unicorn form. And in the end, everybody lives happily ever after, or do they? Or can they? And it's a really delightful, lovely story, and I do encourage everybody to read it. That's my spoiler from my opinion at the end of the episode is, it's good. I liked it. But the first question I want to ask you, Seanan, is why did you pick this book?
So when I was asked if I wanted to come and do this particular podcast, I was told that I should select something that had had a large impact on my life. Mm-hmm. The Last Unicorn was made into an animated feature in 1982 which was written by Peter S. Beagle. I didn't see it in 1982. I was way too young. It is a fairly intense cartoon. You should not be showing it to 4-year-olds. But it was out there, it was floating around, and I was part of the first generation that had access to VHS machines in the home. So I saw The Last Unicorn for the first time probably when I was around 8. And by that time, it had already had a huge impact on my life, although I didn't know it, because the success of the animated Last Unicorn, which is a very modest success, the cartoon was actually considered a failure by a lot of people, but it caused toy makers to realize that there was a market for fantasy in toys that were aimed at girls. And a woman named Bonnie Zachary was able to finally use this to push her creation all the way to market. She was the mother of My Little Pony.
Oh, awesome.
My Little
Okay.
Pony is, without question, the single most important franchise to who I am as a person. Generation 1 My Little Ponies were my entire childhood. They are still all over my freaking desk.
Wow.
Amazing.
To this day, I have a massive collection, and you can draw a direct line from The Last Unicorn to My Little Pony existing.
Well, this is, first of all, you're my 6-year-old daughter's new hero. But also, Ryan, this should sound very familiar, right? The line I often use is, dude, I was breastfed on Star Wars. Like, you know, Star Wars was in my blood from when I was a little kid. And to have something that's that universal and formative from such a young age, right? That's you, right, Ryan?
Yes, absolutely. Finding that connection to a piece, especially something that really, honestly, the way that I think and the way that I view the world has been so heavily affected by early media that I consume, whether it be Star Wars or fantasy, things like that. It's just so much of who I am and what I see the world that, you know, connecting to that, you know, that sort of sense of here's kind of that beginning it's a really cool thing when you can actually go back. And I don't think a lot of people actually can do that with why am I the way I am today? Like we can actually point back to specific things that influenced us to that, to our loves today.
Right. Now, Seanan, what is it about unicorns? Maybe we just we start with that 30,000-foot view. What is it about unicorns that has held your attention for decades now?
I'm actually not super into unicorns. A unicorn is just a horse with a sword stuck to its head. So they are either an extremely phallic symbol that is not super my bag, or they are an angry predator. A horse is a couch with anxiety. A unicorn is a horse with anxiety and a knife. Is a couch with anxiety and a knife. And that's just not great. My Little Pony held my attention because of the huge fantasy stories that were told by the franchise and that I could use to tell on my own. And once I actually encountered the story of The Last Unicorn, first in movie form, because I was a kid, and then in book form, that held my attention because it is an incredibly intensely human story. You know, the unicorn is not human. She is explicitly an outsider to the human experience. But when she becomes human, she has to try and figure out what that means while she's moving through this world of people that are alien to her, whose experiences are not her own, whose motivations she can't quite grasp. And although it took a long time for us to actually put a label on it, because I was a little girl in the 80s, and little girls in the 80s didn't get those kind of labels, we did figure out, once I hit adulthood, that I am in fact an autistic person. So being an autistic person moving through a world of neurotypicals, I'm a unicorn all the time. Like, what the hell? Why is this important? Why are you saying this? You know, one of the requests I was given for this podcast was that we not swear a lot because we want to keep it PG. I can respect that and I can follow that rule. But anyone who thinks that your children have not heard swear words, if you're listening to something in the car with them, is deluding themselves. And so I don't quite understand the point of that sort of things. So that is what has held my attention to that specific unicorn. But unicorns in general, I can take or leave.
Right. Well, the swearing thing, hey, it's not just for the kids, right? It's not just about the kids. No, I understand that. I am in most respects probably neurotypical, and so I didn't have the same kind of struggles. But it is something that through a story like this, perhaps I can do my best to understand what it would be like to be in those shoes as a kid, in the 80s or today for that matter. And so, yeah, stories like this are really valuable that way. Ryan, I want to kick it to you and just ask you how it went for you reading this book. Did you enjoy it? Did you have a good time with it?
I did enjoy this one. And I'm glad that we already really established the concept of fairy tale in this, because the first thing I was like, when Craig talked to me about doing this episode, was at The Last Unicorn. I'm like, ooh, I remember there was a movie about this. I don't know how long this book is, and just seeing it was about 90-ish pages or so on the version that I found. I was like, okay, it's a shorter story. Let's see how this goes. I can go through this. And as I was reading through it, it took me back to similar feelings that I carried with my first read through on Prydain, where it's there's some beautiful depth to some of the character moments in the story, but ultimately it's couched inside of a fairy tale. There's a sense of wonder and magic around it that kind of makes the human story a little more palatable. And so as an adult reading it, I can go through and really enjoy the exploration of, what does it mean to be human, as you talked about, when she gets to the end and she realizes that she's felt regret and love and she's dealt with these different aspects. That's as maybe a 6 or 7 or 8 year old, reading the story or something like that. That's not the story they're likely to pull out, but they're going to really enjoy the wizard, the sorcerer, Schmendrick, and all these pieces, those sort of elements. And so
what a name.
I connected this very much, very similar feelings to this as I did with Chronicles of Prydain. Just a wonderful story that has some great depth to it if you need it, but also some wonderful magic for those who may not be inclined towards or not able to process those deeper elements.
Yeah. Well, Seanan, you've given us a reason why it was important to you at that time and at that age as a younger person. Is this a story that you continue returning to? Is this a story that you've read in your adulthood? And if so, why? What is it as an adult that kind of keeps you coming back?
So a thing that we like to say in my group of friends when talking about the books or the movies or whatever that were important to us as children is that sometimes in the night, the suck fairy comes. You'll be re-experiencing something that really, really meant a lot to you, and you will suddenly discover that there is this huge vein of sexism or racism or imperialism in the middle of this story that you literally did not have the context to see when you were 9 or 10. When you go back to The Last Unicorn, the suck fairy never comes. It is a beautiful story about growth and forgiveness, and that is important. It's just so beautifully written. The language. Did you just lose my video? Because I just got a pop up.
No, you're good.
This recording thing.
You're good.
The language in The Last Unicorn is meticulous. Peter Beagle is a master of his craft. In 3rd grade, I memorized the whole first chapter for an elocution class.
Oh, wow.
So I go back for the language, and I go back for the things that I sometimes think about differently as an adult than I thought about when I was a child. The happy ending cannot come in the middle of the story. It took some time to figure out what those things meant. And once I get it, once I started to get it, it meant so much. Heroes know that things must happen when it's time for them to happen. A quest cannot simply be abandoned. Unicorns may go unrescued for a long time, but not forever. There's just so much hope in that, and so much essential cultural context. Peter Beagle was remixing and recalibrating and re-including all of these things he had grown up with, and he never talks down to his audience. The Last Unicorn is a book for adults that is accessible to children. I will hand it to a 10-year-old with no hesitation if it's a 10-year-old who likes to read. Frankly, I'll hand it to a 9 or 8-year-old, but only if their parents know me really well, because otherwise they might get mad.
Why would they get mad about this book?
Because
I can't
it
think
is
of anything
terrifying at points.
Let's see. So the most terrifying point for me was the initial confrontation with the Red Bull. Although I guess there is what's her name, Mommy
Fortuna.
Fortuna, yeah, Mommy Fortuna.
The unicorns ran down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footsteps. fantasy fans of, I would say, anywhere from 40 to 70, you say that line to them, they will start throwing things at you. Just, it is so viscerally embedded in a thing that horrified us as children.
Well, and I think it's valuable to have something, if not outwardly gruesomely horrifying, it's good to have something that's dark and terrorful. Maybe is a better word than terrifying. To have that introduced at a young age introduces something that the unicorn herself has to live with for eternity. Once we get to the end of the book, this idea that no, not everything is sunshine and rainbows and My Little Ponies, right? That she had to, in her case, love and lose, and she has to live with that for the rest of, the rest of eternity. And so, I have a 9-year-old. He's actually reading Prydain right now, Ryan. So you'll enjoy that for him. But I would hand him this book, and if he got to that point and said, "Dad, this is too scary," then the world is scary sometimes. Keep reading and see what happens.
Yeah,
Just
I
gotta
think
keep
it's
going.
unlikely that most kids would say it was too scary. I think their parents might say it was too scary.
Right. Yeah, that's fair enough.
There's some of the, some really great quotes and moments in there that if you stop and you think about them, it's a really kind of deeper, difficult, maybe some like mildly scary concept or things like that they can go through. There's one, like when you sit and think about it as an adult, the idea, real magic can never be made by offering someone else's liver. You must tear out your own and not expect to get it back. That's some very, very visceral language, ripping out your own liver, things like that. But as an adult, thinking about what you're actually saying, the sacrifice, what it means you have to be willing to sacrifice and give, it's a really, really good quote, a really good statement there. And I would really be interested to see if I handed a younger reader a highlighter and say, highlight the things that really stick with you and show me that, seeing how many of those, if they ever stuck with them, or what would stick with them in their read through.
Yeah. Speaking of stuff that sticks with you, I do want to get back to some of kind of the life lessons, but I do want to bring us down from that 30,000 foot view and get into the story a little bit more, and some of the lines, the characters, the structure, the writing, all that stuff.
Yeah,
Let me pull out a bit of writing for you.
Okay.
Go on.
The unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived there all alone.
Which
like
is
that is the first line of the story. The book starts with bangers, and it never stops.
Let me give you one toward the end that stuck out to me. That was just like chef's kiss, perfect line. Molly, let's see. The three of them floated up the air like milkweed plumes to the top of the cliff. Molly was not frightened. The magic lifted her as gently as though she were a note of music and it were singing her. Oh, and I kind of died and melted a little bit inside at a line like that. I love a good line. Ryan, did you have any others that popped out at you, or should we move on to something else?
I just need a minute to pull my notes on that one. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Sean, and I'm guessing you've got some others. Yeah, I would bet you've got some chambered.
Where have you been? Damn you, where have you been? So part of why The Last Unicorn is so important is the character of Molly Grew, who is our central human female, is not a young woman. She is in the book the age that I am now. And when the unicorn appears to her, she basically just melts down on her, going, where have you been? What good is it to me that you're here now? Where were you 20 years ago, 10 years ago? How dare you? How dare you come to me now when I am this? I wish you had never come. Why do you come now? And that is something that is very much a part of the female experience in fantasy. We are only valuable during the period where we are a reward for heroes to win. Starting at around the age of 18 and then extending to maybe 25, women have a place in those stories. And then after that, they are used up and old and thrown out. You're too old for unicorns, but you're too young for the graveyard. And Molly Grew was the first time I had actually seen that explicitly addressed in a fantasy story.
Molly Grew, yeah, she's the word I was looking for earlier was formidable. She's a very formidable character. I quite enjoyed her. Um, and that line, that moment stuck out to me as well. And also when we finally do learn what her age is and what her circumstances are, I had a similar thought, which is, wow, it's refreshing to have a book that it's a fairy tale. You say it's written for adults, but it's accessible to children. And it is unusual to have characters who are, like you say, in their, what's she in her upper 30s, maybe something like that.
Upper 30s, early 40s.
Right, something like that. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it stood out to me that here's a character who had been through it already. Like life had chewed her up and spit her out in a lot of ways, and then this thing that could have fixed it all when she was younger. When she wished for such magic in her life, that time in her life had long since passed. And so yeah, it's a really beautiful moment, I thought, for her. Yeah. Ryan, what you got?
Yeah, so there's a little phrase inside of, so when Schmendrick releases her, because he's the only one who sees her for what she truly is. Early on in the story, she learns that humans don't see her as a magical creature anymore. They just see her as a white mare. And but Schmendrick, as kind of his own little hidden magical creature, sees that she's a unicorn and is trying to convince her that he wants to help her, that he is a friend. And he goes through, I paraphrase this a little bit. It says, "I know exactly how you feel," Schmendrick said eagerly. The unicorn looked at him out of dark, endless eyes, and he smiled nervously and looked at his hands. "It is a rare man who is taken for what he truly is," he said. "There is much misjudgment in the world. Now, I knew you for a unicorn when I first saw you, and I know that I am your friend. Yet you take me for a clown or a clod or a betrayer, and so must I be if you see me so." Jump down a little bit there, and he says, "We are not always what we seem, and hardly ever what we dream." Oh,
That's a line right there.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous. And just in the context of him trying to win her trust a little bit, to say like, no, I am your friend here, and there's a lot of things that I am and a lot of things that I'm not, and I'm somewhere, the truth is that I'm somewhere in the middle here, but I am your friend, and that much you can trust. That line is going to stick with me for a while.
I don't know if now is the time that I want to get into it, but I want to come back to that concept of friendship, because it's a word that he uses a lot, the character of Schmendrick, and that is kind of the concept of friendship and loyalty and love, and these things are recurring, and it really comes to a point at the end of the story. But I want to bring up something else, and we can get into maybe some other characters in a moment. But for some reason, it popped into my head, and I want to talk about it before I forget about it. And that's the way that the story is actually structured or written. So often we talk about on this podcast, we have stories, contemporary fantasies and sci-fi stories that are told with a really strict point of view character, or characters, and it'll switch between them or whatever. In this one, we get my beloved, cherished, coveted, omniscient narrator who bounces around between all of these characters, and so you don't have to wait for a paragraph break to switch to a different character's POV. And I just love it. I miss stories like this. I crave stories like this. And I think there's a certain permission structure here for this to be used and excused by some people, because it's a fairy tale, and because it's so what's the opposite of concrete? The whole story is very magical and nebulous and not grounded. But in a delightful way. And that gives a permission structure for the narrator to just tell you the story without having to be in somebody's head all the time. But I don't know, Shannon, what do you think of that idea?
I love an omniscient third. I do feel like The Last Unicorn is, as you say, nebulous. There is a magical quality to it, but at the same time, everything hangs together. It progresses in a linear fashion, and there are consequences for choices, which is one of the really important things. If you want to have that omniscient third, you can't use that to just evolve into nonsense. It is going to lose people, especially modern readers. I also love an omniscient third, but they are so out of fashion right now that it's very hard to get reader buy-in on them. But they are more common in that kind of fairy tale space. You encounter them also in the book One for the Morning Glory, which I would say is one of the only stories that's kind of in that same adult fairy tale with weight to its space as The Last Unicorn. You don't hit it as much with T. Kingfisher's Nettle and Bone, which is the more recent addition to that space. Dude, you got to get off me. You weigh 28 pounds.
28 pounds? Is that a dog or a cat?
He's a Maine Coon. He is the largest domestic breed of cats. So he's just being heavy.
Anybody who's listening to this and not watching on YouTube has missed the cat who's kind of stealing the show around here, and I'm here for it, frankly.
He is a very large Maine Coon with a very severe anxiety disorder, so we have to keep him shaved, and then he wears human clothes to keep him from licking himself raw. It's super fun. I enjoy it a lot.
Oh, well, sounds like a delightful cat. Anyway, I'm sorry you got interrupted. You were saying.
Yeah, no, I love the third person omniscient. It's one of my favorite points of view. I think you are correct that it's employed very nicely here.
Yeah. Ryan, should we talk about Schmendrick just so that we can say Schmendrick a bunch of times?
Hey, nothing wrong with that.
You know what I mean? Like, what of all the names in fantasy, this is the one that I kind of laughed at the most, and then struggled with only from pronunciation. Just I don't read aloud to myself, but if I wanted to, I was talking to Sarah about my wife about the book I was reading, and I was like, yeah, and there's this magician his name is Schmendrick, and I was struggling to actually be able to say it. But what a guy! What'd you think of Schmendrick, the magician?
I love Schmendrick. I think he's one of our purer influences in the story. I mean, which is saying something when you're next to a unicorn, which is usually one of the most pure essences there. But especially as you go along, you talked about earlier, his connection with the unicorn and friendship, and really trying to make sure that he is a friend there as they interact with Prince Lear. I might say.
Who hilariously becomes King Lear. Okay.
Right. But in the end, kind of Schmendrick showing that final sacrifice of giving up his immortality to save and to put her back into her form. Like that's a huge sacrifice.
Isn't that what he wanted though? He spends the story kind of lamenting his immortality because it comes along with his inability as a magician.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right? I don't know, Sean. What do you make of this guy?
So I think it is important to note as we discuss Schmendrick and really the story as a whole, that Peter Beagle is Jewish and is thus writing from an extremely Jewish point of view. And this idea that you want to live forever, that you should have continuity of self for all eternity, is not a Jewish approach to this sort of story. You'll find that almost everyone in the story, with the exception of the unicorn, who is explicitly established not to be a human and not to feel regret, not to feel a lot of the things that humans feel until she spends some time as one. Anyone you meet that's immortal is either regretting it or wants out. So Schmendrick does rip out his own liver to accomplish the magic, but he rips out the cancerous liver. And that is still a valid sacrifice. That was still a valuable thing that people would have paid him a lot of money for. But him giving it up is less about losing something and more about validating the philosophy that's behind the entire book. That sometimes the world has to move on. Sometimes you have to allow the tower to fall. Sometimes you have to take that next step into the future, because holding on to the past forever is just going to break stuff.
And and I like what Ryan brought up, that he has a sort of purity about him through almost the entirety of the story, that he's not a wise man. That's not to say he's a dumb man, but he's not a very wise man. He seems kind of perpetually stuck in, whatever place he's in, which is a place of purity. But then when we get to the end of the story, and he does take control of his abilities, he gains his magical abilities, rips out his liver, and all that stuff. It also changes his character for that last chapter. The last chapter and a half, I suppose it is. He's a changed man. He's very different, and the way that he talks to other characters, the way he talks to, I'm sorry, the woman, her name is
Molly.
Molly. Gosh, Molly Grew. I can't believe I forgot her name. But yeah, when he's talking to Molly, when he's talking to Lear, he's talking to the townsfolk. He dispenses wisdom in an entirely different way, where it's like the world, the experiences of the world have actually been allowed to catch up to him now that he is mortal. And it's very similar with the unicorn's experience with mortality as well. But I was really struck by that difference in his character from, it was like night to day after he takes control of the magic. Okay, so we should also talk about the unicorn. Okay, we've talked about a few of the characters around the unicorn. We should talk about the unicorn and, what her journey through mortality was, and how it went for her, and what it means to us. So to just give people a quick recap, there's a great bit of foreshadowing at the beginning of the book when Schmendrick is talking to her, and he talks about the unicorn who was turned into a human by a wizard with the best of intentions. And you're like, okay, I think I know what's coming up a little later in the book. Sure enough, in order to save her from the Red Bull, Schmendrick turns her into a human. The Red Bull is hunting unicorns, and so is it gendered? I can't remember. But the Red Bull doesn't care about humans, and so now that the unicorn is gone, it just walks away. But now the unicorn, Lady
Amalthea.
Now is free to walk about and even live in the same castle as where the Red Bull resides, but also, is no longer immortal. She's now a human and has to deal with that. Where do we want to talk about this? What does this mean for the unicorn? I guess maybe would be the first question. What does this actually mean to be human? There's the comical stuff, learning how to walk, kind of looking a little awkward when she first has to learn how to walk. But, she picks it up quickly enough, but that doesn't mean that she's a human. Shannon, what does this mean that she has to learn humanity?
Part of the conflict is that she did not consent to this. Schmendrick decided to save her in this manner without asking her if this was an acceptable thing to do. He did a horrible thing to her, quite honestly, because she never gets to just be a unicorn again. So it is a very good metaphor for your experiences will change you, and it doesn't matter if they are experiences that you voluntarily had or if they are experiences that were thrust upon you by someone else. Yes, he had good reason. He had excellent motivations for what he did, but we don't know that there wouldn't have been a way for her to get out of the sea. Maybe she was the absolute, straw that breaks the camel's back of unicorns in the water, and the Red Bull wouldn't have been able to keep them all contained. So once she's human, it becomes very clear that humanity will influence you, that the experience of aging, what have you done? I can feel this body dying all around me, will change you, will affect you. And that's part of why Schmendrick changes so dramatically at the end of the book when he's not immortal anymore. He had forgotten some of what it was to be human. And over the course of her time as a unicorn, the unicorn forgets some of what it is to be a unicorn. Even when she goes home, she says, I'm not like them. I know regret, and I have known love, and she can never just be a unicorn again.
On the issue of Schmendrick changing her, I'm a little unclear. I'm moving through the book pretty quickly, and so I'm happy to just be unclear on this. But when he changes her, he allows the magic to work through him. As it will. Right, and so the magic does as it will. I didn't read it as Schmendrick deciding, here's how I'm going to save the unicorn, like it or not. It was more allowing the magic to do its thing, and the magic decided, to change her. I'm tempted to judge Schmendrick too harshly, but I'm not sure if I should for that. Does that
So
make sense?
whether the intention was I'm going to do this specific thing or not, the unicorn didn't say, Schmendrick, save me. She didn't
Hmm.
say, only you and your powerful magic can protect me from this Red Bull.
Sure.
She was there. He made a choice. He
Yeah,
said,
to
magic,
allow
do as you
something to
will.
happen.
Exactly. And whether he thought that would be the outcome or not, it was still done without her consent, without any discussion. I don't feel that we should judge him completely harshly. I love Schmendrick. But I do feel that it's important to acknowledge that the unicorn becoming human, part of what makes that journey difficult is that there was never a point where the unicorn got to go, I'm good. I'm going to go hang out in the Bathypelagic with the other unicorns. Peace.
Sure. Which, yeah, it would have been in the moment, obviously a very difficult thing to, decide in sound mind, right? But no, but I think I take your point. Take your point really well. All right, so the unicorn is now human. She and her companions go and live in the castle of King Haggard, a very interesting character. But in the course of this, so King Haggard has an adopted son, Prince Lear, who
Prince
falls
Lear.
in love with the unicorn. Kind of, love at first sight. Is just the most beautiful person I've ever seen. Whatever. So he's smitten with her and goes on a months-long quest to gain her attention and her affection. He goes and does all of the normal princely things. And in the course of all this, she's doing her very best to ignore him. Is there a moment, I help me out, is there a moment when we feel like she realized that she loved him as well? Or does that moment, narratively speaking, just kind of sneak up on us
Narratively
there's
speaking,
no lightning bolt moment?
yeah, no, narratively speaking, it is a very slow fade in, which is part of why it needs to be that way. You mentioned Haggard. This story is about literally everyone learning to give up on what they think they have to be happy. The unicorn gives up her solitude and her, for lack of a better word, purity as a unicorn. Lear gives up his idealistic view of what it is to be a hero. Haggard has to give up his unicorns. Schmendrick gives up his immortality and the idea that he will someday be the most powerful sorcerer in the entire world. And Molly gives up a lot of her bitterness. She gives up the resentment that the world was not kind to me when I was younger and acknowledges that she still has all this time in front of her for the world to be kind to her in. So giving up a certain measure of that unicorn detachment of allowing herself to fall in love has to happen in a subtle fashion, because otherwise it's another heroic act on Lear's part.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ryan, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at that. I hadn't really thought through the sacrifices each person has to make in there. But yeah, that really does kind of sit and give focus to the main through line of this book, setting up sacrifice. And I thought it was interesting, specifically with King Haggard, like that his entire happiness is based on these unicorns being his and being trapped in, that he's got these here, and
Possession and dominance.
yeah, and that letting them go put him into despair. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm having to
No,
mull
yeah,
over
that's
this process a little bit, because it's a strong through line, and I think I don't know.
as with many of the best books, and a lot of the books that you and I, Ryan, have read for Author Shelf. As with many of the best books, I'm going to say this one will benefit a lot from rereads, especially rereads that come not back to back, but you read it, give it a couple of years, read it again, see
Yep.
what's changed in you, and see how that changes in the book and all that stuff.
And while
Because there's, go on.
sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say, I know that this is a podcast about books and not films, but in the case of the Last Unicorn film, Peter Beagle wrote the screenplay, and it also helps with contextualizing some of the things, like being able to watch Amalthea fall in love with Lear. Having those visuals can really assist.
Yeah. Well, we do talk about film more than we probably should, because it's faster than reading a book sometimes.
Mhm.
So, no, I think that's really great. I am going to go watch the movie now at some point,
Good.
maybe today. We'll see. Although I have to say really quickly before I get back to my point, I was going to ask Ryan another question, but I will say the one thing about this book that I found the most enchantingly written was, and terrifyingly so, was the description of the Red Bull, and the chase of the Red Bull, and how it would turn, and how it would fill up the sky, and how it would shrink down to, fit in the passageway with them, and this thing that was more a force of nature than it was an actual animal. And as I haven't seen the animated film, but as I was thinking about that, I kept thinking, how would you render this being? Because I love the rendition of it so much in the book.
In the nightmares
Anyway.
of children for the next 20 years.
I'm gonna find out, and maybe sleep poorly tonight. So we'll see. But I want to take the unicorn's experience as a human, and her love of Prince Lear and his love of her, and the love that Schmendrick and Molly seem to build over the course of the story. It's never, the story isn't about them falling in love necessarily, but there seem to be seeds of that at least.
Mm-hmm.
And also going back to the idea of Schmendrick telling the unicorn, "I am your friend. If I know one thing, it's that I am your friend." Right?
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, we've been friends for, dear Lord, 25 years, something like that. You don't want to talk about it too often, right? But, and this is a trick question, why are we friends, Ryan? All right, let's see what you do with this.
Well, let's see.
I'm not actually expecting you to answer this question, but I am interested.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's see, free stuff.
Yes, absolutely. No. Okay, let me tell you why, and why you're struggling with this. This is actually perfect. 6-8 months ago, something like that, I was chatting with a friend of mine, and she asked that question. We'd been friends for several years at this point, and she said, why is it that you are my friend? What have I ever done for you? Kind of was the implication. Why are you my friend? And at a certain point, I just had to say, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
your friend, because at some point I decided that you are my friend. Luckily, you made the same decision, and that's wonderful. But sometimes that's all it is. When it comes to friendship, when it comes to love, it defies description. It defies easy categorization or understanding even. So there's a moment in the last chapter when the day has been saved, whatever, the unicorns are all freed, and now King Lear and Schmendrick and Molly, they're wandering through the countryside. They come across the town of Hagsgate, which was formerly prosperous because of the curse of the witch, and now it's destitute and crumbled all around the townspeople. And he says, you may plant your acres again and raise up your fallen orchards and vineyards, but they will never flourish as they used to. Never, until you learn to take joy in them for no reason. And the word reason was something that I started to see popping up a lot. Maybe this is just because of where I'm at in my life and what I'm thinking about. But this, for me, was the great through line of the book, was that there were characters who kept trying to impose order on things that defied order and
Mm-hmm.
reason and logic. And love was one of those things. Love and friendship. Characters are always trying to understand these things. And at a certain point, the book says, stop it. All of this stuff is without reason. And there's value in having some things just be enchanting in your life, and without reason. Much like the imagery in much of this book is without reason. that's okay. Love it anyway. Enjoy it anyway. I don't know. Shannon, what do you make of this?
There is a song by a band called the Neils called Easy People, which is about basically just, I don't want to have hard people in my life anymore. I want to have people that are easy for me. And that is a lot of where friendship and love come from. As you say, there's no reason. You meet someone and either you're like, oh my God, ride or die, let's go. Or you're going, get away from me. And it can be someone everyone else you know loves. There's not a reason for these things. And you are correct. The book is very much about don't try to impose your order, but also don't only have the things you have because of what you expect to get out of them. Love can be just as bad as it is good. If you only love your orchards because they give you apples and not because they are beautiful trees and a home for insects and birds and providing shade and all these good things to your life, why do you deserve the apples? If you only love a unicorn because it belongs to you and no one else, why do you deserve a unicorn? You probably don't.
Yeah. Ryan, now why are we friends?
Because you're a unicorn that I really appreciate.
That is correct. That's the answer I was
Aw.
looking for. I'm your unicorn, man. You're my unicorn. There you go. All right. Let's do some final thoughts. I know we need to let both of you actually go in the next few minutes. And so let's just do a final thought from each of us on the book. Ryan, let me start with you, and we'll wrap up with Shannon after I give a final thought. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know often for final thoughts, it's kind of recommendations on this, but I think that this is, like I said, it's not a long read, and I think a lot of people can benefit from it, from the opportunity of going through and reading it. And like we mentioned earlier, this is one that I'm going to be very frank for a moment here and say, in a lot of sense for people, or for me at least, when you said I'm reading The Last Unicorn, my expectations were very different than what I got here. And please fight your instinct to be like, I don't want to read The Last Unicorn because it sounds childish or it sounds this, whatever. Fight that instinct because there are some beautiful messages in here. There's some wonderful things, and it's a very good story. Don't let yourself get trapped into any sort of preconceived notion about this book. Just go in fresh and really let it have its effect.
Yeah. That actually feeds really well into my final thought, which was I kept thinking as I was going through this book that, like many of my favorite books, this is very much the cave on Dagobah, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You know what I'm going to say? What's in this book? What is in The Last Unicorn? The same thing as is in the cave on Dagobah, only what you take with you. And it's a book that rewards introspection as much as it does the reading of the actual text. And I think it's extremely valuable that way. Shannon, final thoughts on the book?
So, final thoughts on the book. I think you've kind of gotten my thoughts on the book. I will say that Peter Beagle, the author, is still alive and is one of those rare cases of if you have the opportunity to meet your heroes, meet your heroes. He is one of the nicest, kindest, most thoughtful men I've ever met. You meet him and you go, this is someone who could have written The Last Unicorn. I do think it is an important story to read or share with or show to children. But it doesn't matter if you didn't get it as a child. It's still there for you. The unicorn is still in the lilac wood, and she doesn't have to be there all alone.
Well, very nice. What a sentiment to wrap up on. Oh man, everybody go chase your unicorns, please. Your life will be all the richer for it, even
But
if
not
you never
into the
catch
sea.
them. Well, okay, maybe not into the sea. Let's not get carried away here. No, that's wonderful. So, all right, that's The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. I really do hope that if you haven't read it, that people will go check it out. I was
Please
delighted
do.
by it. Now, Shannon, let's talk about Into the Windwracked Wilds for just a moment. And I want you to sell us this book, okay? Tell us about the series, tell us about this book in particular, and give us a little elevator pitch on it.
So, Deborah Baker was the greatest of the American alchemists during the period of her life and was attempting to control what's called the Impossible City by changing the alchemical map of America. Unfortunately, L. Frank Baum did not like this because she was a lady-shaped person and that offended him, so he released the Oz books to rewrite Her Alchemical America into his own. The Up and Under books are basically A. Deborah Baker's primer, as was written in a fictional world. They are entirely what's called a postulatory, which means they don't exist. I am writing them because they are background material for a different series. This is book 3. I highly recommend it, but I also really, really recommend reading Over the Woodward Wall first, because if you start with book 3, you're going to be very confused.
So tell us again, book 1 is
Over the Woodward Wall.
Yeah. So yeah, people should go check that out. It sounds very interesting. So is it in conversation then with Baum and the works of the time, or
to a certain degree, yes. I mean, legitimately, everything I have ever written is in conversation with The Last Unicorn, so that is kind of a dual conversation. But these books are in conversation with Baum and with the rest of it, and also with my own Alchemical Journeys series, which is where they started. And the first of those is Middle Game. The Up and Under books are suitable for 8-year-olds. They are written as middle grade. You can hand them to a kid. Nothing in there is going to upset their kid. Don't do that with Middle Game.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, well, I hope people will go check them out. And Seanan McGuire, again, thank you very much for choosing The Last Unicorn, a book that I might not have chosen to read on my own, but this is why we have the author's shelf and why I value it so highly. Thank you for choosing such a wonderful book.
Yep, I am very glad to have made your life materially better.
There you go. And for everybody else, thank you so much for listening. Again, go to thelegendarium.com where you can join in the conversation, support the podcast, find previous episodes, all that stuff. Ryan, Seanan, thank you for the discussion, and I will see everybody next time.
Thank you for joining us. Bye.